Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, Moon Jae-in became the first South Korean president in 19 years to visit Russia. Though Seoul and Moscow have plans for cooperation, how will they accommodate their common neighbor, the DPRK? And our exclusive interview with the executive director of UN AIDS, he explained the vital role that China has played in tackling the HIV/AIDS worldwide. This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Let's begin our program today in Moscow, where South Korean President Moon Jae-in is on his 3-day state visit. Moon is the first South Korean leader to visit Russia in 19 years. He outlined his vision for future cooperation to the State Duma upon his arrival on Thursday. On Friday, he met with his counterpart, President Vladimir Putin. His trip will conclude on Saturday with Moon watching his national team play at the FIFA World Cup. This visit follows the U.S. DPRK summit earlier this month. Before we ask our panel the significance of it, let's take a look at this.
A state visit after 19 years. South Korean President Moon Jae-in met with Russian President Putin in Moscow on Friday. The two leaders discussed the recent denuclearization process on the Korean Peninsula, as well as regional cooperation.
You know that Russia has always been supporting normalization of the situation on the Korean Peninsula. We always have and aim to continue to passively contribute to the settlement of this issue.
I consider Russia and South Korea to be key partners in the Korean Peninsula and Eurasia. We are determined to continue our strategic partnership with Russia. This is an important vector of our international policy and our security policy.
President Moon met with Russia's Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev on Thursday. After that, he gave a speech at the State Duma, the lower house of parliament. He said Russia is key to peace on the Korean Peninsula, and economic cooperation between Russia and both countries on the peninsula could be established, while joint research and discussion on railways, natural gas pipelines, and power grids have been carried out. He added that Pyongyang has been taking real steps towards full denuclearization. Earlier this month, U.S. President Donald Trump and the DPRK leader Kim Jong-un held a historic summit in Singapore and signed a joint statement agreeing to work together towards denuclearization. President Putin also invited Kim Jong-un to visit in September, while he met with DPRK top legislator Kim Yong-nam at the Kremlin last week. It seems that camaraderie among Northeast Asian nations are moving forward.
For more discussion on the topic, we are joined in our Beijing studio, Zhao Tong, fellow in Carnegie's Nuclear Policy Program, based at Carnegie Tsinghua Center for Global Policy. Welcome, sir. And also in Washington, D.C., Dr. Yang Kim Reno, who's a senior advisor to the Institute of Korean Studies in George Washington University. What a pleasure to have you. And join us in Moscow, we invited Mr. Mark Sleboda, International Relations and Security Analyst. A great pleasure, sir, as well. Let me begin by asking you, Dr. Kim Reno, about the visit South Korean president to Russia. First time in 19 years. Wow. But the most important thing is what is going to be like for South Korea seeking help and support coming from Russia on the DPRK nuclear issue, or more specifically on the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue?
Well, I think
I think that
Let's
Russia
go to Dr. Kim Reno.
has played a
I think Russia and North Korea have been in very close relationship, and their support will actually reinforce the good mood that has begun. We call a real spring has come in the relationship in the Korean Peninsula. So I think their support will mean a great deal to all parties in this case.
Mr. Slobodka, how many flowers will Russia make blossom in the so-called the spring, as Dr. Kim Renaud just mentioned?
Yeah, I think that Russia is really hoping that improved relations will lead to a greater development, not only between Russia and the two Koreas, but also spur greater development of the entire Northeast Pacific region. Russia's really looking for foreign investment. And railways, energy deals to South Korea, which is really hampered by having to import all of its gas via LNG, liquefied natural gas. Pipeline gas from Russia would be much cheaper. It would help spur the South Korean economy. They could do wonders to spur real development in North Korea, energy infrastructure. They could spin off pipelines to Japan. It could be a start of a renaissance for the entire region. The alternative, of course, is unthinkable. And would be warfare. So Russia's really trying to push behind the scenes, I think, to do everything possible to further this denuclearization of the peninsula.
Dr. Kim Renaud, if you look at the statement coming from President Moon Jae-in from South Korea, he's been talking about once the peace regime is being established on the Korean Peninsula, the two Koreas might need to seek support for economic cooperation coming from Russia. So that statement makes people wonder how South Korea looking at Russia's role now during the process of Korean Peninsula denuclearization while the peace regime is being established at the same time.
Of course, that was the utmost stumbling block in developing any initiatives in their effort to get along with our northern neighbors. And once the pressure of that war is kind of at least attenuated, we can talk about economic cooperation, which will always help a political situation. Because once people invest in each other and work for a common goal of profit, it can only help. So denuclearization, I guess, and economic cooperation will mutually benefit each other.
Well, certainly that will be true, but what about the sequence of events? If you listen to the South Korean president, Mr. Zhao, it seemed that he's suggesting, well, the peace regime first. Obviously, the peace regime usually goes together with the denuclearization first, and then a three-party cooperation on the economic field. But of course, Russia was originally involved in the six-party talks, and the Russian president was receiving the National Assembly leader coming from DPRK, likely also to invite the DPRK leader later in September to Russia. So is there some different roles that Russia think about itself? Well, South Korea look at Russia in terms of what's going to be like on the Korean Peninsula.
I think South Korea wants Russia to play at least two roles. One is to play a role in the establishment of new peace regime. Russia apparently has a very special relationship with North Korea, Soviet Union supporting North Korea in the Korean War. Before North Korea-China relationship recovered in recent months, Russia has been, over the last few years, the best friend of North Korea. There was even rumor about Kim Jong-un wanting to visit Russia first. So having Russia's support, having Russia play a role in a future peace regime over the Korean Peninsula will help reassure North Korea. Russia can make North Korea less concerned about security. Russia can help counter any possible U.S. or South Korean military aggression against North Korea. So after making North Korea feel safer, I think Russia can also play a role in the second stage of the process, which is to help North Korean economy integrate into the regional economic network. So Russia can play both roles in both stages of the process.
So, Dr. Kim Renaud, that's quite a sensitive line, isn't it? I mean, what exactly going to be Russia's role? If you think about South Korea, ally of the United States, well, the U.S. certainly is not on good terms with Russia, and therefore South Korea has to be very careful as to how close it gets to Russia, even on the issue of Korean Peninsula denuclearization. However, on the other hand, the North Korea certainly feel much safer to deal with Russia over the years, and especially at this critical juncture, even though it is also closely dealing with China. So, Dr. Kim Reno, how is South Korea likely to maintain that beautiful balance in a way?
I think the word here may be diversification, and also Korea's situation, the geopolitical situation really forces them to really get recognized by all parties concerned. And it's a good thing that Russia is interested in promoting peace in the peninsula, and I don't think U.S. would object to that, their participation. And President Moon is not going just with Russia. He's trying to actually get along with all the parties surrounding Korea.
Right.
So in that perspective, it should only be regarded kind of positive. But
right.
You have to know there are lots of Koreans who are not really with the president either, although his popularity has been really shooting up.
Very interesting point over there. Mr. Sloboda, I mean, if you look at Russia's real influence on the issue of Korean Peninsula denuclearization, it is quite significant. And meanwhile, China and Russia have been working together on some of the key issues, for example, step-by-step, and also so-called parallel development, a peace regime, at the same time denuclearization. So what can Russia offer, particularly when South Korea is an ally of the United States, but South Korea certainly understands it cannot just rely on one in order to get things done? Mr. Sloboda.
Yeah, I think the South Korean president really said it well in Moscow when he says that economic cooperation between Russia will be the cornerstone that solidifies any peace process. The potentials for energy, for railway shipping that would extend from South Korea through the Trans-Siberian all the way into Europe, bringing South Korean goods directly into the market. As well, there's the potential for Arctic shipping now because of climate change, which would also drastically cut the shipping process. Electricity, bringing Russian hydroelectric power from Siberia also to the Koreas. This is what would cement a peace deal. But I think Russia and China are in lockstep politically on this. What they want is a peace deal that will not see a complete withering away of the North Korean state in the near future, such that it doesn't lead to U.S. military bases marching the entire way up the Korean Peninsula and right onto both of their borders. And this is something that the U.S. would very much like to see. And they're very concerned about the geopolitical balance in the region. If U.S. troops are asked to end their 70-year occupation of Korea, and Japan is going to look kind of askance at that as well. So there's a lot of geopolitical interests from the West that are going to challenge Russia and China's economic interests going forward in the peace process.
Mr. Zhao, if you look at that, I mean, the Korean Peninsula denuclearization does not necessarily just mean that the DPRK has to denuclearize. It's actually all the apparatus on the Korean Peninsula, including those coming from outside the peninsula that have been stationing there and also established there, needs to be denuclearized. So, Mr. Zhao, to what extent the involvement of Russia will help DPRK to make sure of that process? But then the question is, to what extent can they really help?
Well, I think on the denuclearization issue, South Korea and Russia have a lot in common. both countries basically support the incremental process. You know, after the Singapore summit, everyone is saying, you know, China's suspension strategy was proven correct and workable. But Russia basically has the same idea. They use different term, phased process. But I'm sure in Kremlin, Putin would say, look, it's our strategy that has been working. And in South Korea too, Moon Jae-in also wants to do this slowly, step by step. So all the three countries support this process. So by bringing Russia in, I think South Korea can counterbalance the very hawkish element in the United States, who wants to do this in a one-shot manner and even want to resort to a military option if diplomacy doesn't work. So that ensures peace and avoids military conflict. Looking to the future, even if North Korean denuclearization cannot be achieved in the near-term future, I think South Korea also feels a great need to coordinate with Russia, because the secondary security implication would be U.S. will continue strengthen missile defense development and deployment in this region. Russia will respond very strongly. So how to avoid this becoming a major issue between Russia and the United States, and both countries putting pressure on South Korea, making South Korea in a very uncomfortable place. So to deter that from happening, I think South Korea has incentive to engage with Russia beforehand.
Talking about the situation on the Korean Peninsula, we are seeing Dr. Kim Renaud August. There is going to be another round of reunion between the North and the South families. And this is, of course, going to be one of another time that the families got together. But how much does it really say? The whole process of complete denuclearization and the process of establishing peace regime is actually on its way. Does it tell us anything about that?
I think because Koreans are really working with a sense that they are blood brothers and blood relatives, and they are separated. It is such an emotional and very urgent kind of feeling that separated families are now, actually they are dying away, and the very tragedy of this separation, unwanted separation, is really highlighted when these meetings occur. And this is really a beginning of trying to have good feelings for each other and wanting to be together and get rid of hostile stance right now they are all experiencing. Nobody's happy with it.
Well, this is going to be...
essentially, this is really one step towards trust building, because that is the key word.
The family reunion moment is usually the most emotional moment one could ever see. I mean, just think about these families being separated for decades. And finally, at the end, almost their lives, they could eventually be united, but just for one time. It is not at all that these families could come back together for the second time, because that has never been the real case over the past 2 decades. Having said that, though, Mr. Sloboda, the American President Donald Trump, on his Thursday meeting with his cabinet, he was talking about complete denuclearization already happening. It is starting. He's talking about destroying 4 nuclear sites, even though his cabinet members later, without mentioning names, tried to suggest they did not know what the president exactly meant. So, Mr. Sloboda, it seemed that the American president has become an advocate for DPRK in a way, whether actions are taking place or not of complete denuclearization. So that puts Russia in a very interesting place, isn't it?
Yeah, I think if you take a look at the documents that was signed by the U.S. and North Korea by Donald Trump, you see that what was actually enacted was the freeze for a freeze agreement the freeze of nuclear and missile testing in return for a freeze on U.S. military drills, particularly with nuclear strategic assets on the North Korean border with South Korea. That is, Russia and China's plan is what has been implemented.
Yeah.
And I think that, if anything, Donald Trump's nature, his pulling out of the deal with Iran, the history of U.S. weapons of mass destruction deals with Libya, Iraq, and Syria prove that the U.S. is simply not a reliable partner. That's why the basis really going forward is the Panmunjom Agreement between North Korea and South Korea. And I think Russia and China are trying to position themselves such that if the United States bows to its worser instincts, such as John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, and throws this peace process to the side, that it can be continued between North and South Korea with Russia and China as the interlocutors, no matter what the United States and Donald Trump does from week to week.
Very interesting you said about that. Mr. Zhao, we just noticed that the DPRK leader just visited China, actually right before the South Korean president went to Russia for the very first time in 19 years. It seems that there is some logic there.
Yeah, of course, the visit, the third visit by Chairman Kim within 100 days to China. The primary goal is to brief on the results of the Singapore summit, but also if we read Chinese President's comments, President Xi said in purpose, I think, this year is the 40th anniversary of China's opening up and reform. So China wants to support North Korean effort in pursuing its own way of developing its country. And also after their meetings, Chairman Kim went to see the results of the exhibition of the science and technology innovation of the Chinese Academy of Agricultural Science. So he does show an interest in seeing how China has developed to learn from the Chinese experience. He also went to a major traffic control command center in Beijing.
Right.
And also looking at the next step, there is rumor that when Lavrov was in Pyongyang meeting with North Korean leader, he might have invited Kim Jong-un to visit Vladivostok in September to attend the Russian Fourth Eastern Economic Forum.
Right.
So the main theme is really to focus on economic development. So all of the regional countries, China, Russia, South Korea, all want to focus on how to help North Korea pivot to economic development and reintegrate into international economic system.
All right, and with that, we're coming to the end of today's discussion on the Korean Peninsula issues. Thank you so much for the three of you for your input and your insights. Dr. Yang-Ki Kim Ri-no, Mr. Zhao Tong, and Mr. Mark Sloboda. Really appreciate it. Have a great weekend, everyone.